It began not with a bang, but with a flicker on a screen, a number that started to fall, then it fell faster. Across the continent, in the bustling financial hubs of Lagos, Johannesburg, Nairobi, the value of our money, the very paper we held in our hands, was plummeting. Stock market tickers, once symbols of growth and aspiration, turned into waterfalls of red. The graphs that had once pointed optimistically toward the sky now depicted a cliff, and our economies were in freefall. It was a dizzying, disorienting moment, a collective gasp felt from the Cape to Cairo. The promise of a new African century seemed to be evaporating before our very eyes. Headlines screamed in bold, unforgiving fonts. "Currency in freefall," one blared. "Economic chaos," declared another. These weren't just words, they were body blows to national pride and individual security. The numbers were abstract, but their impact was deeply personal and immediate. Every percentage point drop meant the price of bread, fuel, medicine, was about to climb. The savings that families had painstakingly built over generations felt like they were turning to dust. The stability that so many had worked so hard to achieve was being ripped away, replaced by a terrifying uncertainty that crept into every home and every conversation across the continent. The air in the financial districts grew heavy, thick with a tension you could almost taste. Traders, once the confident masters of this universe of numbers, were now seen with heads in their hands, their faces etched with disbelief and exhaustion. The usual symphony of ringing phones and excited shouts was replaced by a somber, frantic hum. The sleek, modern skyscrapers that symbolized our economic ambitions suddenly looked like tombstones against a gloomy, overcast sky. This was more than a market correction. It felt like a verdict, a harsh judgment on our progress, and the silence between the frantic calls was filled with a single, deafening question. How did we get here? This was the day the numbers on a screen became a national crisis. It was the moment that the intricate dance of global economics tripped and sent an entire continent sprawling. Far from the boardrooms, trading floors, the reality of the crash began its slow, cruel march into the lives of ordinary people. The crisis wasn't just about financial instruments or complex derivatives, it was about the future of our children, the dignity of our elders, and the very soul of our nations. A storm had arrived, and we were all caught in its unforgiving path. It was a moment of profound vulnerability, a test that would push us to the absolute brink. The crisis did not stay confined to the gleaming towers of finance. It spilled out onto the streets. Its cold touch was felt in bustling markets and quiet neighborhoods where life happens. You could see it in the eyes of a mother at a market stall, her brow furrowed as she calculated how to feed her family with money losing value each hour. You could hear it in taxi drivers at a rank, their hushed, worried tones as they discussed soaring petrol prices and what it meant for their livelihoods. Economic jargon melted away, leaving a raw, human reality of fear and anxiety. Daily symbols became sources of distress. Currency exchange boards, normally a backdrop, became focal points of collective pain. Crowds gathered, watching numbers change, their hopes rising and falling. A grim silence fell as currencies shrank against the dollar or euro, a public scoreboard of decline, a constant reminder of powerlessness. Cities' vibrant energy was slowly choked by a creeping dread as foundations felt unstable. The emotional toll was immense, a crisis of confidence in economies and in ourselves. Proud, resilient people began to question everything. The dream of a better life, sending children to better schools, starting a small business, suddenly felt impossibly distant. Hands that had built the future now clutched what little remained, a desperate gesture against an invisible force stealing security. This wasn't just about money, it was about dignity, watching a brighter tomorrow slip through your fingers like sand. In homes, conversations changed. Laughter was replaced by tense budget talks. Plans were put on hold. Dreams deferred. The crisis's weight settled on families' shoulders, a quiet, profound sense of loss. The continent's emotional landscape shifted, people under siege, not by armies but by economic collapse, threatening decades of progress. In quiet personal struggles the true cost was counted, one worried family at a time. As Africa grappled with its spiraling crisis, the world turned its gaze upon us. But it was not a look of empathy or support. Instead, it was one of skepticism and doubt. From the imposing, sterile buildings of the World Bank and the IMF in Washington, D.C., stern-faced analysts appeared on international news channels. They spoke in clipped, authoritative tones, their words painting a grim picture. They issued warnings, predicted further collapse, and spoke of our economies as high-risk and unstable. It felt less like an analysis and more like a final judgment being passed down from on high, confirming the world's lowest expectations of us. The global financial machine began to react, and its response was swift and brutal. Graphs on financial news networks illustrated a phenomenon known as capital flight, showing massive outflows of foreign investment. It was a digital stampede for the exit, as international investors pulled their money out, fearing they would lose everything. The logos of powerful credit rating agencies like Moody's and Standard & Poor's became dreaded symbols, as they downgraded our nation's creditworthiness one by one. Each downgrade was another nail in the coffin, making it harder and more expensive for our governments to borrow the money needed to weather the storm. This external pressure amplified the anxiety at home, creating a vicious cycle of fear. The world's lack of faith became a self-fulfilling prophecy, fueling the panic and deepening the crisis. On the streets, the international skepticism was felt as a deep betrayal. After years of being told to open our markets and integrate into the global economy, we were now being abandoned at the first sign of trouble. A powerful sense of isolation began to set in. It felt like we were on our own, a continent set adrift in a turbulent economic sea, with the rest of the world watching from the safety of the shore, ready to write our obituary. This, however, was not just a moment of despair, it was a moment of reckoning. Stripped of foreign confidence and facing the cold shoulder of the global financial order, a question began to form in the minds of leaders and citizens alike. Were we going to accept this narrative of failure? Were we going to let our fate be decided in boardrooms thousands of miles away? Or was this the moment to look inward, to find our own solutions? The world had written us off. They saw a crisis, a collapse, a continent on its knees. But what they failed to see was the spark of defiance being ignited in the hearts of millions. This was Africa's defining moment. The crash was not a random act of nature, it was a storm with a clear anatomy. It began with the numbers, the cold, hard data that financial experts live and breathe. For weeks, the warning signs had been flickering. Our trade balances, what we sell to the world, what we buy, had been tilting in the wrong direction. We were importing far more than we were exporting. We were paying for foreign goods with precious foreign currency, primarily the US dollar. This created an insatiable demand for dollars. Our own currencies piled up unwanted in the global marketplace. It was a simple case of supply and demand, and our money was on the losing end of the equation. As the pressure mounted, our central banks tried to hold the line. They used their foreign reserves, dollars, euros, to buy up our own currency, artificially propping up its value. But it was like trying to hold back the ocean with a bucket. The global market forces were too powerful, the demand for dollars too immense. Our reserves began to dwindle at an alarming rate. Analytical graphs from that time show this decline in excruciating detail. A steep, terrifying drop. Every bar on that chart represented $1 billion spent, a desperate attempt to maintain a stability that was already slipping through our fingers. The inevitable was coming. Then came the moment of capitulation. One by one, central banks across the continent had to let go. They could no longer afford to defend the value of their currencies. This decision, known as devaluation, was a brutal necessity. In an instant, the official exchange rate was adjusted and the value of our money was slashed. A single dollar that might have cost 500 units of our currency yesterday suddenly cost 800, then 1,000. For anyone holding the local currency, it was a catastrophic loss of purchasing power. The numbers on the screen weren't just abstract figures, they were a direct assault on the life savings and daily wages of millions of people. The immediate aftermath was a cascade of economic pain. The cost of everything imported, wheat for bread, parts for machinery, life-saving medicines, shot up overnight. Inflation, the silent thief, was unleashed upon the population. The technical term was currency devaluation, but on the street it had a much simpler name: disaster. The intricate mechanics of the financial world had delivered a devastating blow, and the real-world consequences were just beginning to unfold. The numbers had spoken and their verdict was harsh, leaving an entire continent to grapple with the fallout of a system that had turned against it so violently. In the wake of the crash, the world's financial system revealed itself for what it truly was: a giant, complex chessboard. On this board, not all pieces are created equal. Currencies like the US dollar, the euro, the Japanese yen act as kings and queens, moving with power. Our African currencies, however, were often treated like pawns, weak, volatile, easily sacrificed. The desperate flight to the dollar only weakened our own currencies further. Our money, faces of national heroes, symbols of heritage, was being rejected for foreign paper. It was an economic crisis that felt like a cultural wound. The continent's leaders, presidents, finance ministers, central bank governors, found themselves facing an unprecedented challenge. They were no longer just politicians, they were crisis managers. It was a catch-22. Every solution created another problem. Leaders were trapped between global markets and their people's needs. No easy answers, only hard choices. As the initial shockwave subsided, a new, colder reality set in. This was a fundamental breakdown. Survival now depended on a different kind of calculus. The simple, brutal arithmetic of self-reliance. If the world would not help, we would have to help ourselves. If foreign goods were too expensive, we would have to learn to make them ourselves. It was a pivot away from the glamour of global finance and toward the grit of local enterprise. The calculus was simple. Every bag of rice grown at home was one less bag we needed to import with scarce dollars. Governments began to draft policies that were once considered radical. They started talking about import substitution. They offered incentives for entrepreneurs to start small factories producing everyday goods like soap, textiles, processed foods. When imported cornflakes became a luxury item, local porridge started looking a lot more appealing. When foreign-made clothes became unaffordable, local tailors saw a surge in business. The calculus of survival was being worked out not just in ministries of finance, but in kitchens, workshops, and marketplaces across the continent. The first and most visible arena for this new economic reality was the local marketplace. Long the vibrant heart of our communities, these bustling centers of commerce became the front lines of the nation's fight for survival. Imported goods grew scarce and expensive, creating space for local ingenuity to shine. Suddenly the spotlight was on. The woman selling spices she ground herself, the artisan crafting shoes from local leather, the vendor selling snacks made from age-old family recipes. A new kind of consciousness began to emerge. Buying local. Buy Niger. Buy Kenya. People began to look at the labels to ask where things came from. Every purchase of a locally made item was a small vote of confidence, a tiny investment in a neighbor's business, and the country's collective future. While the markets buzzed with new energy, the foundation of the counterintuitive play was being laid in the rich, fertile soil of the continent. The nation turned its gaze back to its own land. Fields that once grew cocoa or coffee shifted to cassava, yams, maize, and vegetables for local markets. They built full value chains, processing, packaging, and marketing them. Cassava transformed into flour, starch, and even biofuel. Tomatoes became paste and sauces competing with imports. Millions of jobs appeared in farming, transportation, processing, and sales, revitalizing rural towns. The soil and the seed had become the bedrock of our economic miracle. While the grassroots revolution in farms and markets was rebuilding the economy from the ground up, a far more audacious plan was taking shape. It was a project of breathtaking scale and ambition. For decades, our continent, rich in crude oil, had suffered a bitter irony. We would extract our own black gold, ship it thousands of miles away to be refined, and then buy it back as petrol, diesel, and plastics at exorbitant prices. This colossal project was designed to shatter that cycle of dependency once and for all. It was a vision of economic sovereignty, rendered in steel and concrete. Its sheer size was difficult to comprehend. We are talking about a sprawling industrial complex covering thousands of hectares with pipes, towers, and tanks rising from what was once empty swampland. The vision was to build the largest single-train refinery in the world, capable of processing hundreds of thousands of barrels of our own crude oil every single day. This was a quantum leap. We were no longer content to be mere suppliers of raw materials. We would now control our most valuable resource from extraction to the final product, capturing its full value for our own people. The construction of the refinery was an undertaking of epic proportions, a true marvel of modern engineering. It involved dredging millions of cubic meters of sand, building a dedicated port, and laying hundreds of kilometers of pipelines. At the heart of this monumental effort were the people. Thousands of engineers, technicians, and construction workers from our own country and from across the continent were mobilized. They worked side by side with international experts, absorbing knowledge, honing their skills, and proving that African talent could execute a project of this complexity. The construction site became the largest university on the continent. The innovation required was relentless. The project didn't just use existing technology, it adapted and improved it. It was a showcase of how industrial development could be pursued responsibly and sustainably. From the moment the first plans were announced, the project was shadowed by a familiar chorus of doubt. They called it a white elephant, a grandiose folly that was too big, too expensive, and too complex. Securing international financing was a Herculean task. Many global banks refused to participate. The struggle to fund the refinery became a battle in itself, a fight against a global financial system that was deeply skeptical. And prove them wrong they did. As the project neared completion, the tone of the international commentary began to shift. Skepticism slowly turned into grudging admiration, and then into outright awe. The project that was deemed impossible was now being hailed as a game-changer. The ultimate act of defiance was not arguing with the critics, but succeeding in spite of them. The day the refinery was finally ready to begin, operations was a moment of profound national significance. The moment of truth had arrived. With the press of a button, valves opened and powerful pumps whirred to life. The nation's own crude oil began its journey into the heart of the great machine. The first drop of black gold entering the refinery was more than a technical procedure. It was a deeply symbolic act. It flowed into the main distillation tower, where it would be heated to extreme temperatures and separated into its valuable components. Hours later, the first products began to emerge. The first trickle of refined gasoline, diesel, kerosene, aviation fuel. The results came back positive. The products were of the highest international standard. A wave of celebration and relief swept through the control room. We had done it. The first drop of refined fuel produced by the new refinery was not just a commercial product, it was liquid pride. The impact of the refinery was immediate and transformative. Almost overnight, chronic fuel shortages became a thing of the past. Queues at petrol stations vanished. The price of transport stabilized, which helped control the price of food and other essential goods, bringing relief to millions of households. It single-handedly slashed the nation's import bill by billions of dollars, dramatically improving our trade balance and strengthening our currency. The foreign currency once spent on importing fuel could now be used to invest in other critical areas like healthcare, education, and infrastructure. The refinery also became a major exporter, selling surplus products to neighboring countries, which created a new and significant source of foreign exchange earnings. It transformed our economic relationship with the region. The refinery became a catalyst for a broader industrial renaissance. It spurred growth of downstream industries, creating everything from car parts to packaging materials to household goods. Ultimately, the industrial game-changer did more than change our economy. It changed our mindset. It proved we could compete at the highest level of technology and industry. The game had truly been changed, and we were the ones who had changed it. The success of one nation's audacious economic pivot did not remain contained within its borders. Like a powerful current, its influence began to spread, creating ripples of change across the entire region. Leaders from neighboring countries now saw a viable, homegrown alternative. Delegations began to arrive, not from the IMF or World Bank, but from neighboring capitals. They came to learn, to understand the policies, the strategies, and the mindset. The conversations were no longer about managing decline or securing bailouts. They were about replicating success. The dialogue shifted from one of shared crisis to one of shared opportunity, sparking a regional awakening. Inspired by the success of the Made Here movement, nations started to look at their own unique strengths. A country with rich bauxite deposits began to draw up plans for its own aluminum smelter. A nation with a long coastline started to invest in its own fishing and seafood processing industry. The idea of a West African or an East African economic bloc, once a distant political dream, started to feel like a practical necessity. Leaders began to talk seriously about harmonizing trade policies, investing in cross-border infrastructure, and even exploring the possibility of a common currency. The transformation within the continent led to a fundamental change in how its nations engaged with the world. The old posture of a supplicant was replaced by a new kind of economic diplomacy, conducted from a position of growing strength. Presidents held respectful conversations. Partners, not rivals. They discussed pipelines to carry refined fuel to neighboring markets. They planned highways to connect commercial hubs. Diplomacy focused on tangible projects. The condescending tone from IMF and World Bank softened to curiosity and respect. Charts that once showed capital flight now showed improving trade balances, stable currencies, and a steady inflow of patient long-term investment. The new mantra, trade, not aid. Leaders welcomed partnership but rejected dependency. They sought investment that transferred technology and created local jobs. The story of Africa's economic miracle is not a conclusion, it is a blueprint. It proves a country needn't choose between its people and the global market. True strength is built from within. It championed the idea of building from the inside out, nurturing domestic markets, supporting local entrepreneurs, and achieving food and energy security first. A nation could produce for itself and in doing so, build the capacity and quality to produce for the world. This new paradigm was dynamic, adaptable, and most importantly, authentically African. The ultimate legacy of the crisis and the remarkable recovery was this powerful new idea. The paradigm of self-reliance was more than an economic strategy. It was a declaration of independence for the 21st century. And so, we arrive at the end of one story and the beginning of another. The skylines of our cities tell this new tale. Where once they stood as gloomy symbols of a crisis, they are now vibrant monuments to resilience and ambition. The transformation is visible everywhere you look. The dark days of currency collapse feel like a distant memory. The narrative of a continent on its knees has been replaced by the story of a continent on the move, the defiant roar of a lion that was told it had lost its strength. Today that roar echoes across the globe. The new skyline is more than just buildings. It is a declaration. It says, we are here, we are strong, we are the future. The continent has not just recovered, it has been reborn. Beyond the gleaming skyscrapers and impressive economic statistics, the true measure of this revolution lies in its people. The ultimate dividend of this economic miracle is a human one. It's the story of empowerment. The real miracle is seeing a generation empowered to build their own futures. The human spirit, when given a chance, when fueled by belief and opportunity, became the most powerful economic engine of all. The revolution created a new social contract. Success was a shared project. This fostered a powerful sense of unity and national pride. The greatest achievement of this journey is the restoration of dignity and the unleashing of human potential on a continental scale. The human dividend is the real wealth of Africa, and it is a fortune that will continue to grow for generations to come. The story of Africa's economic miracle is not a conclusion, it is a blueprint. The path forward is guided by lessons learned in the fire of crisis. Continued investment in our people, deepening regional integration, and embracing technology and innovation. The future will bring Pan-African companies, Pan-African infrastructure, and a stronger Pan-African identity. Self-reliance has provided the compass. Forward, together. The economic miracle was not a destination, it was the beginning of a new journey. It was the moment Africa took control of its own story. And this is a story whose greatest chapters are still to be written. The revolution continues.